On this episode of the SpunMafia series of my podcast, I grab a few of my former team members to talk about a pivotal moment in our time working together. I'm joined by Joe Koufman, Shannon Delaney, and Raghu Kakarala, and the moment we discuss involves a bit of an intervention with one of them, and, well, I don't want to spoil it. By the way, if you haven't already, I highly recommend you check out the other episodes of the SpunMafia series. The focus is on the building of my first company, SpunLogic, from the early years to our sale of the business, and even 5 years after when we sold the business a second time. We talk about the ups and downs of our journey and share quite a few never-before-told stories. And hey, while I've got you, definitely consider subscribing on whatever platform you're listening on. I have a lot of great guests lined up that, trust me, you won't want to miss. Okay, let's get into it. You guys ready for this? We're here to tell some truths.
Is Joe ready?
I know. I know.
Wait. I've been ready.
Okay, this is a really exciting episode of the SpunMafia podcast series. We are going to tell a story, little humiliating for one of our guests, but he tells it. So this is going to be a story about a reckoning that happened with Mr. Joe Koufman. But let me start by having my guests introduce themselves. Tell everybody who you are and what you do. Shannon.
Shannon Delaney. I head up brand and marketing strategy at Launch now for like my third week. So it's very exciting.
Awesome. Great agency. Raghu.
Hey, everybody. If you've watched earlier versions of this podcast, you already know who I am. Otherwise, I'm the former business partner of Mr. Jeff Hillemeyer and colleagues with Joe and Shannon back in the day. These days, I find myself being an owner at 44, a large e-commerce firm here in town.
Excellent. Is that how you start off all your openings? I'm a former business partner of Jeff Hillemeyer.
Yeah. So if you don't like me now, you probably liked me back then.
Right. Joe Koufman, the victim. As
All right. So I am the founder and CEO of Setup, and we're marketing matchmakers. And I started Setup soon after Engauge sold the Publicis Group in 2013.
Great. Okay. So let me set the stage. So we were building SpunLogic for years. Shannon, when did you join Spun?
2006.
Okay. So every year that you were a part of SpunLogic, I don't know if you knew this, but I was trying to recruit Joe Koufman to come and join us and run sales. Like every year I'd go, Joe, it's time for us to have that conversation. And we'd go have lunch and I'd try to convince him and I just never could. I thought he'd be the one that got away. And then he agrees to join. Joe, did you know we were selling? It was right when we were about to sell.
Yeah. So I spent 8 years at a .com called Knowledge Storm, and we sold to our biggest competitor went public and used half of the money to buy Knowledge Storm, and that was in 2007. And then I was like, in fact, I found the email thread back and forth between you and me, Jeff, where I finally said, hey, we got acquired and I don't think I want to join the acquiring company. Do you want to talk? And so we started talking. The conversation got more and more serious then.
And you officially joined what date?
December 26th, 2007.
Okay. And then we were acquired March 26th, I believe, of 2008. Became part of Engauge. So where this gets interesting is Joe, I knew to be really good at sales and marketing. I knew his work ethic. I knew his heart. I knew his smarts. I knew he could do the job. But month after month of him starting at SpunLogic and then Engauge, I was hearing from the other senior leaders about how terribly Joe was doing. Some were worried about his knowledge of the space or lots of things. And I just knew, I'm like, this is so crazy to me because I know Joe can be successful. So I guess after 6 months, late May, I finally said, the only way we're going to deal with this is if we just get everybody in the same room and you guys just tell him to his face all the ways he's disappointing you. And so that is the impetus for this conversation. I was pretty sure it was either going to work or he'd be gone. Like that was the two ways. So coming into this meeting, let's hear from Raghu and Shannon about working with Joe 1.0. And
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, what led to the eventual thing that was inspired by the Seinfeld Festivus episode for
Airing
talking
of
to
the
Joe,
grievances.
the airing of the grievances. Yeah, so actually with Jeff, I remember quote unquote whining and dining Joe. I remember meeting up at what was it, the MF Sushi back in the day when it was on Ponce,
Hmm.
and trying to get to Joe to join, and also really familiar kind of with his reputation in town, which made me surprised that he really kind of sucked at the beginning when he joined us. And I didn't really expect he would suck that bad. In fact, he could very much roll with the punches. He was never he was never felt out of place in any one social situation or being tossed into stuff. In fact, the very first time Joe and Jeff and I took him on a new business call. On the drive to the new business meeting, Jeff and I realized that the lead was really bad and we never were going to close any business with them. So we made him introduce the company on his first day, and he actually didn't know what we did. I think that was with Comcast here in Atlanta. So I was unafraid of being in a meeting with him and he could think on his feet. Then all of a sudden I was like really afraid to be in a meeting with him. And I think Shannon can delve into it a little bit more, but I realized that there was a giant gap that Joe went from selling the same thing all the time to different customers to selling different things every time, sometimes to the same customer. It's because really everything we were doing was custom, but also we were getting to learn ourselves still. We didn't have agencies are always evolving, but we didn't have our spiel down completely. And we needed to read cues in the room and figure stuff out, or really just understand the space more. And Joe didn't know either. And he was used to walking confidently into every meeting, knowing the exact same thing that he knew before, until we realized that we had to tell him that he actually didn't know anything. So awkward setup, but that was kind of the background.
And you definitely touched on it. I think what I noticed was, there were a couple things going on, right? We were going through our own growth spurts and pains, and we would kind of bring on something new we didn't really know how to do, and we'd have to all scramble to figure out how to do it, and then we would get good at that thing, and then we would turn around and do the same cycle again. So I think we were all pretty used to doing that with each other. And then Joe came in, and I think Joe was just really comfortable being able to sit down with a customer and getting a list of sort of requirements and problems, and then basically having a solution, right? And saying, well, here's what I have for you. Here's how we're going to solve it. Whereas we were living in a world where a lot of these problems didn't really exist or didn't have an exact solution, and we were making up a lot of it as we went. And so I think there were times when we would get into sales type situations where it felt like, well, the thing they were asking us to do and what we could do were really disconnected from each other, or the way that it might have gotten talked about versus, when we walked in to talk to that customer, and the way we would approach it would be really different. So I think there was just a couple of those things going on. Like I said, it's really about coming from an environment. And I had done that, by the way, myself, where I'd spent 5 years in software and everything was a, feature set. So it was like really easy to sell that way, and having to kind of think of a different way to do that. So I think there's just things that we saw up front around like qualifying prospects, as you alluded to a minute ago, that made it really challenging. And then I know for me personally, I was running this tremendously fastly growing team that was servicing the Home Depot account, and we were just getting projects thrown at us left and right. So anything that felt like it was kind of keeping me from that was very frustrating if, it was a resource drain or distraction. So I remember that was kind of where probably some of my frustration was coming from, was like, I got this big thing over here, and now I keep getting pulled over for things that maybe were distracting. So that's probably where the source of my frustration was. And I actually like to call the meeting, I think you said reckoning. You talked about Festivus. My name for that meeting was, here are all the following ways that you suck. That's what that meeting was for me.
Yeah.
Like, we went around the room, and it was really and truly one of the most awful things I think I've ever been part of. It was so gut-wrenching to sit through and to be part of. I remember it really well.
Yeah, most people after those meetings, everybody's trying to convince you to join a 12 steps program.
Yeah. Right.
So we really were looking after your best interests. Except also, I think there was a bit of a piling on just because there was so much built up. Because remember, we were going through the sales processes, the busiest any of us had been at any time. Honestly, part of it was Jeff was so busy, he didn't see the things that were wrong.
Mhm.
That's why he had to have the meeting in the first place. If you had dialed it back a year and it was May 2007, we were talking to you, there's no way Jeff would have not known for 6 months that you were sucking. But Jeff and I were so busy from probably the second half of 2007 all the way through May of 2008, where we had a full-time job of doing the roadshow, doing due diligence, and running the firm, that it was very easy to let something slide for a while. And it probably wasn't the only thing we let slide a little bit, just because we had to hand some responsibilities over. So it wasn't that Jeff was clueless. Jeff was literally too busy because of all the stuff that was going on to know. Also, I think Jeff, you and I also learned something else that we probably refined and probably are still trying to figure out: how to do a contract with somebody in new biz or sales, that's base and bonus. What should the bonus be about? If the bonus is equal weighted to any kind of business you bring in, you make the same thing. Are you incenting them in the right way to grow in the kind of stuff that you want to grow in? Or should a big opportunity be more involvement versus the small opportunity? How qualified should it be before it goes to people like Shannon or or creative or technology to help close it? A lot of stuff was misaligned, and every time we try to figure out new biz, I feel like I'm always still trying to figure out how to line up incentives, right? Because I think incentives drive behavior in sales tremendously. And there was a misalignment about what side of the opportunity, how qualified it should be, what happens when you burn a bunch of hours from client services or the discipline leads in order to close business. Everything was kind of a little sideways.
So Joe, before the meeting, what were you thinking? Were you thinking things are going fine, or there's some road bumps, or were you thinking this isn't working?
Well, first of all, I'm very surprised that it was May, because I seem to remember this happening much earlier than that. But I think it was May based on what I've looked at now that this was happening. So keep in mind, I've been there, January. In my brain, I thought that this whole conversation was happening like March, like 2 or 3 months in, not longer than that. And I knew things weren't going well for me, and that it was clear that I was causing some frustration for the rest of the team. And little things. I mean, particularly Shannon, because her team felt the brunt of my inexperience because I would come up with what I thought was a pitch, an opportunity. And then her team, I remember particularly Greg on your team, had to build out the proposal, because I had no idea how to build out a proposal.
Oh yeah.
And I do remember several incidents over the time where it was clear to me that, and by the way, what I suspect happened was that the three main people that were airing the grievances came to you, Jeff, to say, you got to get rid of this guy. And then Jeff's response was, if you got a problem with something that he's doing, you can tell him. And then, you got the meeting together so that you all could then tell me directly, to your point, Shannon, about all of the ways that I sucked. But yeah, it was clear to me that that I was not succeeding. And I think in hindsight, it's easy to say that it was the transition from selling product to selling services that was the real gap that I was experiencing. But that certainly wasn't the way it was voiced initially. And that wasn't the way I didn't see that until later, that was really the issue. I think that really was the issue. But at the time, I just, I knew there was a problem. I didn't really
I don't know that any of us saw it that way back then, because we were just so freaking busy, and time lets you, step back from that. I think what was really challenging for me was you are without question one of the nicest people that I ever have met, even to this day. And so you just sort of like the way I described it, and it sounds terrible, you know, I love you, but I said, Joe's just like this idiot savant of relationships, like in that everybody loves him and he just like stumbles into opportunity because he's just so nice. You know what I mean? It was like everybody loved Joe.
I'll take it.
Wait, are we doing another reckoning right now?
No, no, because I feel like that, but that's how I saw it at the time, was like, but I knew there had to be something to it, right? Like it wasn't just Joe's so nice, so everybody gives him an opportunity. Like it was obvious to me that you'd accomplished things and you had been good, or you wouldn't be where you were, right? So I knew that it was there. I think some of my teammates were probably a little more vocal about like, get him out of here. Maybe more so. I don't think I was there. I really don't remember it that way. I think I was just more like, this guy's killing me and I got all this stuff to do over here. Like, make it stop, figure it out. Yeah, that's kind of how I remember.
Well, I think there was an element, and I think I remember this quote. I think I remember who actually first said it was Melissa Reed, actually, that having a conversation with Joe is like taking a puppy for a walk. Like there was all these non sequiturs and things like that. And within a room of people, it's great because it takes all these tangential relationships among multiple kinds of people. And when you look back at how that conversation happened, it has kind of a through line that connects everybody in the room, or at least, a lot of people in the room. But it's kind of random, like sort of taking a puppy for a walk.
Are you sure that's not us talking about you?
right.
I'm sorry, I had to.
Yeah, no, I am the king of non.
I think that's a pretty good assessment. That's a pretty good assessment of me. I don't know, generally.
No.
This is the
though I do remember one other piece that Shannon, in addition to us going through the sale of the company, B, that we were busier than ever. C, I think April 2008 was literally our biggest revenue month ever in the history of Spun Logic. And of course, Spun disappeared, but even our portion of Engauge shrank because the economy was beginning to recede a little bit. So April, which was like peak busyness. On top of that, Shannon, you were pregnant with your first
I was
child.
just going to say, I was about that time, I was spending most of my time.
Super sick.
A second child, and spending most of my time trying not to throw up in a trash can in the middle of that meeting. So yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we, and then meanwhile, and meanwhile, if I wasn't dealing with something with the company, I was dealing with something with our lawyers, our investment bank, our accountants, or all the due diligence crap. So it was peak busyness. And Jeff was just so busy, he didn't even know anything was going on.
All right. So let me pause for one moment, because if people don't know us, they're going to be feeling really bad for Joe right now, because we're just like, but here's what people need to know. He now has a thriving, growing business doing exactly the thing that we're all saying he was terrible at, like literally doing that thing. So it has a happy outcome. So Joe, we sit down in the meeting, we start peeling back the onion. You clearly remember this was a big moment in your career, was it not?
Yeah. So, and actually, this wasn't the first time that this had happened to me in my career. I was managing an Eddie Bauer in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and my assistant managers all took me to breakfast to tell me to get my head out of my ass. So
wow.
I'd been through it once before, not quite in the same way, but it was, I remember that day crystal clear. I remember the conversation. I remember going home that night and, having the conversation with my wife about what I experienced that day.
And tell us what it was like.
By the way, I found my old pipeline from 2008 too, and it was not bad. It was pretty good, actually. It ended up being pretty good, even though we were going through there's a big economic downturn that happened right then too. But we had a good year. So I got called into the meeting, and it was Raghu, Shannon, Melissa, Ryan Tuttle, and Jeff. Those were the people in the meeting. And it was basically, everybody airing their grievances, so to speak, about why I wasn't prepared to do my job, and I wasn't really functionally able to do my job. And I remember hearing all the feedback and thinking to myself, I got two paths here. One is get really defensive and try to defend myself and start, fighting back, or listen to the feedback and accept it and then decide what to do with it from there. And I don't remember a lot of the specific words, although I do remember Raghu kept saying over and over again, it's like you just don't care. It's like, and that was the one thing that caused me to really decide not to get defensive, but also I knew that there was nothing further from the truth. I cared more than anything. So I knew that wasn't the real issue. And so to me, that led me to help me understand that the issues were not that, they were other things that may or may not have been legit, and probably were legit based on, I wouldn't be called into this meeting if they weren't legit.
Yeah. By the way, Joe, I think on the as you don't care thing, I think that maps back a little bit to, we never thought through comp, and a big piece of that, and just multiple other sales things after that, is when you're aligned on incentives, everybody cares about the same thing the right way, meaning a $25,000 opportunity versus a $250,000 opportunity, and the amount of work that you're being asked to pursue on each one should be drastically different. But if you don't set things up the right way, how do you know that you're asked for this thing versus something else? Or looking at your portfolio of work coming through and seeing of how much help you can pull in to help you isn't a bottomless well. So I think when you think about it that way, you're like, okay, it's like you don't care about the resources you're using or the amount of work involved for the size of an opportunity, because it's really important to line all those things up together.
Yeah, but here's the amazing thing. I think that was your main concern. And I think Shannon had a totally unique and different set of concerns. And I think Melissa had a totally unique and different set of concerns from that.
Yeah.
In other words,
we had one unified one, Joe. And I think that was coming out of like the big meeting that I'm not sure we're supposed to be saying who the meeting was with. I don't have any problem with it after all these years. But Jeff or you Joe, you could say it. But we were also going from like a decent sized company with a few brand name clients to try to get these bigger and bigger deals. And we were finally having a chance to look really good to top notch companies. And we just didn't want to have all our effort and all our things just come across badly because we weren't set up right to have a really good meeting.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard to get the meeting in the first place. Though you want to walk in there just aligned and doing really well and just have a great meeting, because you have those and half of the time you'll get the business, but other times you can go through 10 of those meetings and get nothing. And we wanted to be set up really well.
Yeah, I think another thing that I've actually heard you talk about part of this, and because you've told this story, Joe, you're very brave telling this story out in the public, which is the only reason I asked if we could do it. But that was a very high performing team that you were thrust into in the middle of growth and change, but that team was performing exceptionally well. And so you not getting it on the first try or the second try, I'm sure was really hard for that team to wrap its head around, because they were, to Shannon's point, dealing with so many things. And so, but what I've heard you say before is that you respected everybody so much in that room that helped you also process it and say, okay, there must be something here, because these are great people. So
yeah. So during that meeting, I took notes, and I definitely documented what I was hearing. And I tried to, so that night I went home and spoke to my wife, and I said, they want me out of here. Like, they want me out of here. And I said, I could have taken that job selling software for Oracle or one of the big software companies for twice as much money. And I would have been hugely successful doing that. Although I do remember talking to a recruiter from one of those companies, and they said, do you smoke and do you drink? And I said, no, not much. I don't smoke and I don't drink much. And she said, well, you're going to start because this is really stressful. So but I knew
that
I
wasn't
could be.
the sales pitch Raghu and I gave you to get you to come.
Yours was a little different. Yeah.
Similar.
Similar. But so I knew that they wanted me out. And but I tried to document all of the things that I wasn't doing well. And I said to my wife, either I can go get a job and make twice as much money doing something else that I might not love as much, but I think I'll be successful and do fine, or I can fight and try to figure out, solve these issues and problems that I'm having and prove them wrong, that I am capable of doing this. And I did appreciate at the time that, Jeff facilitated that meeting, partially because maybe you really did want me to have the opportunity to answer these concerns and deal with them, and partially because it wasn't really your problem. It was their problem. I mean, it was ultimately, but it was their problem to air and solve with me, I guess. But that night I made a list I boiled all the feedback into probably 4 or 5 key things that I thought were deficient from me. And, I remember some of those things were like attention to detail. In my old life, in my old job, it was very, to your points earlier, I could turn around a proposal in 15 minutes, not 2 days. It takes 2 days at an agency to get the feedback from different groups. And it was understanding of agency and agency world and agency life, and not understanding the role of a business analyst and a user experience expert or information architect or a developer or creative. It was, to your point, Raghu, not able to gauge which opportunities are a perfect fit and which opportunities we should just go ahead and pass on early on. And so anyway, there were these 4 or 5 things. And what I resolved to do was go back to each of the 3 people and show them my list. Here are the 4 things I'm going to do. And I always joke that it was things that were like, if you were only taller and more handsome and smarter, we would like you, kind of thing.
You actually said that in the follow-up. I remember that.
Yeah. So it was like, they weren't easy things to change. I'm like,
right.
Well, if I get some plastic surgery and some lifts in my shoes and a reverse lobotomy, then we'll be good. But anyway, so I made the list of things. I came back to the 3 people and I said, hey, if I can overcome these 3 or 4 challenges, are we good? And you all kind of begrudgingly said yes, in that you were kind of like, yeah, good luck with that, but sure, like if you can solve these 4 big things, then we're good. And then I really focused on trying to learn and resolve those 3 or 4 things. So I spent a lot of time with the teams within the agency trying to understand what they did. And I tried not to request too much time because I knew I was also using resources by asking them away from their jobs to talk to me. But, I spent a lot of time looking over their shoulders while they did card sorting for UX tests and while they were writing code and while they were doing these things to try to understand how they did their jobs. And I started to really focus on proposals and how much detail work has to go into doing an RFP response or a pitch or proposal. And, I was working on these things simultaneously while I was working on the sales side of things and trying to nurture some opportunities. And we started winning. We started winning several opportunities. And the more we started winning, the less concerned the team was about me and my specific performance. Because at the end of the day, I remember, Jeff, at one point you saying to me, I don't care if you go downstairs and run laps around the building if you think that's going to help us win new business, and it's going to, if the results are there, then that's great. And I think that was the turning point, me digging my heels in and making the decision that I was going to fight. And I don't mean fight the 3 people. I mean fight to give myself the tools and experience that I needed to be successful in the job. And by the way, as a result of doing that and sticking around and getting some wins after that, I think I earned the trust and respect of those 3 people who ended up being advocates, not advocates, but, true partners for me. So to your point, Jeff, about high performing team, I became part of that high performing team. It just took some time and energy to get there.
I remember after that meeting was over, like driving home that night and feeling like just sick to my stomach about what you had just gone through. I just remember feeling so bad. Like, you just kind of like shrunk lower and lower and lower in your chair. You were like maybe this tall when you walked out of the building, and just remember thinking, man, how's this guy going to do it? And I remember when you followed up with that meeting and you came in and you were super prepared. You had your list and you were like, here's what I heard. Here's what I'm going to do about it. And you're right. I was kind of like, all right, buddy, good luck. Let me know how I can help. But you did follow through, because I remember it was almost like the annoying little brother there for a while too, because you were like, can I follow along on this research thing? And can I sit in on this thing? And you really worked hard to insert yourself into the stuff that we were doing and wanting to kind of like immerse in it and live it so you could understand it. I do remember that. And I remember leaving that night and saying to Ryan, actually, man, if this guy rises from the ashes like a phoenix, it will be a miracle. And I feel like, yeah, there you go. And you did, and I think that I took away a lot of things. I still think about it to this day. I think about, as a result of it, how I give people feedback. It still filters through my mind. And then also how I receive feedback. And no one likes to, not often do we like to sit around and get feedback about ourselves. But I remember watching what you went through, and I always kind of think like, man, if he could sit through that, anybody can sit through a feedback session. So those were kind of some of the things I remember, like, day of, and then here we are, hindsight 2020, that I still talk about that. I still talk about that meeting to other people. I was going through something late last year and earlier this year with an employee that I was coaching that just could not receive feedback. And I would try to draw from that and think about like, what was it that was so unique and special about Joe that he was able to do that, where I can't get this one person to hear, this piece of information about themselves. So it's stuck in my brain for probably forever.
So I think this is probably not a management lesson, this particular podcast, or maybe it is, because it's just not applicable to the vast majority of things. One, the question is, should Shannon and I have waited that long to give him feedback? The answer is no. Should Jeff have been so busy he didn't know what was going on? No. Should Joe have checked in sooner or more regularly to see how he was doing? Yes. And should we have an airing of the grievances to hurry up and make up for the fact that we should have talked like 3 months earlier? Definitely no. But in this particular case, it was the right thing to do, because otherwise it would have lingered. And then a few months later, we would have just said, hey, Joe's not working out. And especially with the salesperson, you hire somebody and you don't expect to close anything the first 3 months. They had to build a pipeline. They got to do a lot of things. But then 6 months in, and then 9 months in, and then 12 months in, if you wait 12 months to finally like have that thing and there's still no pipeline, what did you just invest 12 months in for? So it's just, you just had to manage sales differently. But I think there was a unique set of personalities involved that were, even without this, we would have been friends if we had gotten to know each other. And because of that, the good culture of Spun and into Engauge, where there was a number of core friendships that we naturally brought together, people with different backgrounds, sure, but like enough ability to give each other shit, or to support each other, or to think about each other in the right way, that at varying times we really supported each other through ups and downs. Mostly ups, though. I mean, we really grew ultimately through it all.
The thing that I remember is that after that, you all felt way more comfortable just directly telling him when he did something wrong, or like, it was so clear to me, like how quickly it was like, Joe, I told you the last time we talked, read this, go back and read that. Like you guys felt comfortable doing that. And it,
I mean, after
ability.
rip the Band-Aid off the way we did, what's left? How can
None of that, no other feedback after that fazed me a bit. I was like, whatever.
He was bulletproof. He was bulletproof after that. No, I mean, I do think, here we are now so many years later, 12 years later. And we know so much more about empathy and leading with empathy. I think we were getting a big lesson in it at that time and we just didn't know. I mean, I think about it a lot now, like I said, and how you give people feedback. And I don't ever hesitate now to give feedback to people. I don't wait. That was probably the biggest lesson that I learned out of it is I don't ever want to get to an uncomfortable situation like that ever again with anybody that I work for or that works for me. That I'm much more on the fly with feedback, good and bad. So I think that's probably a really good, takeaway as a result of it. And then also just, the things you give people feedback around, we're so used to thinking about it from a performance review standpoint and having these sort of buckets of things. And you don't always capture all those squishy things around it that don't fit into some of those buckets. So I think that's something that I think I've tried to focus on and grow over the years. So like I said, I don't ever find myself either where you were sitting at that table or where I was sitting at that table for that matter.
Yeah. By the way, I think of it, I see it as this big arc from the time roughly around the time we hired Joe, which still is also that 6-month meeting. I mean, it's just sounds like a long time, but really the first few months flew by because we were just so busy with everything else. All the way through for a different call, I think Jeff might have been in that meeting as well, but I was in a meeting in Columbus years later for a really good opportunity. That was just a bunch of prep went into it and the meeting just didn't go well. Kind of an odd dynamic in the meeting. Was just frustrated. Hopped in a plane, flew to Philly to meet up with Joe and Jeff. Maybe Jeff might have been flying with me from Columbus to Philly. And then driving in the rainstorm to see for Hershey's. And we threw out everything and we just said, hey, let's just walk into this meeting because we knew that we were in sync with each other and just really knew and literally said, the beginning of the line was, what would you like to talk about today? And then the person said back, I don't know, you're the one who asked for the meeting. And then immediately after that, we had seconds after that, we launched into stuff and had one of our best meetings of all time close the business and won a lot of work with them. We're literally seeing objects in the room and incorporating that into our pitch, which was the exact opposite of the pitch in Columbus that I think Jeff and I were both at, that even with a bunch of prep, the chemistry wasn't right for the people on our side to have any quality meeting. It was just very time-consuming, frustrating, and blew a really good opportunity there. And then suddenly came into this other one and just said, hey, look, we trust each other. We know each other. We each know the firm really well. Let's both walk in there and just have a great conversation with no slides. And that's like the arc of the beginning to, kind of the peak era where we just really knew what we could do well. And when everybody in the room had that equal amount of confidence and belief in each other, it was really good. And what was missing in Columbus for that prior meeting wasn't that we didn't know what we were doing really well. There just wasn't that, everybody wasn't in sync with each other, and there just wasn't that trust that everybody in the new room knew exactly what the agency was doing the best of any other agency in the country at that moment.
It's a really good point. I think we got so good at it because we, to your point, trusted each other. And no one was trying to be the one with all the answers. Okay, we kind of threw the ball around the room based on, whatever needed to be talked about at that time. So we got really good at it. Thanks to Joe for sticking around.
Thanks. Well, yeah. And Jeff, you brought up something that I want to kind of address, which you're like, well, how courageous for you to talk about this situation. I mean, you all know me. I mean, I'm a very optimistic person and a very positive person. I try to be at least. And why wouldn't I talk about it? It was a pivotal moment in my life that caused me to grow so incredibly much and learn so incredibly much that it was a hugely positive experience. I mean, I can tell you how incredibly terrible an experience it was that day, and even for the weeks after that, while I was putting in the work to try to learn. But it turned out to be a very crucial, we can all remember certain points in our career where a conversation or a person or a thing or an event happened that had a profound impact on the rest of the trajectory of our careers. And that was certainly one of those moments for me where, overcoming that difficult feedback and putting in the work to get to the place that I wanted to be allowed me to be prepared for all of the other things that came later. And I always looked at it like that. I never looked at it as, I kind of joked at the beginning of this conversation. I changed my name from Joe Koufman to the victim. I was never the victim. I brought it on myself, right? But we always have two choices of how we respond to something. One response is to crumble, and one response is to rise. And I chose in this case the take this feedback as a way to grow and get better, versus take that feedback as a way to crumble. And I don't think that's heroic. I think we should all take adversity and use it to our advantage. It's to use it to our advantage.
So, Joe, you won't notice it until you look back at the podcast or video, but behind you, you have one of your setup, pieces, and there's an arrow pointing right at your head, like you're being set up for something. But yeah, it's sort of the theme of
set up for success, Raghu. I'm being set up for success. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Joe, I appreciate you. I love that, we were able to tell you how much we respected you for coming out of that, doing the hard work, having to face everybody that next day. And to Raghu's point, maybe there's some lessons in here, probably lessons not to do some of the things we did, but at least we got to a good conclusion. So any parting words from my guests before we close it down?
If you're going to spend several years in business together, make sure you do it with people that you would have spent several years with anyway. Because there's no point in wasting your life, putting out good effort with each other if you don't really like each other and would have done it in a different context other than just work.
I love it. We'll end on that. Oh, Shannon, you got something?
I got nothing after that.
I do. I would also just say, there's value in feedback, good and bad. Actually, there's probably more value in bad feedback than good. And so let bad feedback fuel you. There's an opportunity to let it fuel you. And as a lesson, as a leader, to our points, is deliver that feedback, because I think the person getting the feedback will appreciate it, and will be able to grow from it. It's sort of like, when you're at a restaurant, if you don't complain about something and then give them a bad review or rating, the restaurant 100% of the time would rather you give the feedback immediately about something you didn't like than leave a bad review or rating later. Give them an opportunity to fix it. And thank you all for giving me an opportunity to fix it. I didn't get fired in that meeting. I had an opportunity to get better and grow. So thank you for the feedback and giving me the opportunity to fix it.
Good to see everybody. Thanks for doing this.
That was fun. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Shannon.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Hey, we were just reminiscing about old times, and you found an old document.
Yeah. So back in the SpunLogic Engauge days. So SpunLogic became Engauge in, let's call it April or May.
Let's call it March 26th of 2008.
It's okay. I was gonna say April or May was like when things like we stopped saying SpunLogic and started saying like, oh, we're Engauge Digital, which was the new kind of name for what it was. But I remember at the end of 2008, there was a lot of door closing and private meetings, probably especially with regards to the acquisition by Engauge and becoming part of Engauge. And so there was this kind of backlash to all these closed door quiet meetings. And so as a leadership team, and this may have been driven by you or it may have been driven by a larger effort, but we decided that we're going to try to keep our doors open as much as possible and not close our office doors. And so the document that I found, and Raghu is joining us here, the document that I found was we were supposed to document every single time we had to close our doors.
I remember making that rule. I remember saying you've got to write down, if your door closes, here's why.
Yeah. So
hey
Raghu, we're recording a quick clip about the closed door experiment and why we shouldn't close our doors and keep our doors open. And there were fun things on this list that I found, like Jeff, you wrote on December 15th, half closed the door as we had a conference call with NATO. I'm not sure who NATO, like NATO, like the NATO Treaty, North Atlantic Trade Organization. And then there were others on here that were, so I wrote, had to close the door for 5 seconds because my umbrella was wedged behind it there. Do I owe a quarter? Because I think we had to put $1 in the jar. And then I also wrote one on December 17th. Brad M. tried to close my door for a meeting together, and I wouldn't let him. I think he might have muttered weirdo under his breath.
Yeah.
And then there were a series of posts from another leader that was on our team that were kind of the benefits so far of opening and closing your door, and then the drawbacks of opening and closing your doors. So those, I don't know if you remember the reasons for that to happen, or do you remember the experiment to try to get everybody? I think at one point I tied my door open to a rail, and so somebody couldn't close it even if they tried.
Was this on the 17th floor or the?
No. This was 22nd floor.
22nd,
okay.
Yeah.
But it was let's keep our doors open as much as possible, and there were some fun. And Jeff, you were really trying to resist. Like, had a long call with blank client to hear how we've screwed stuff up over and over and over.
That sounds like a closed door meeting to me.
Yeah.